Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another Doctor Who review. And today's Doctor Who review is none other than Sylvester McCoy's The Harvest. So, without further ado, let's jump right into the story. The year is 2021. Young Mr Hex, a nurse who works as a surgeon in London, is doing his everyday rounds and everyday job, when all of a sudden he begins to notice and become more alert that something's not quite right in his organisation. Meanwhile, he bumps into a Miss McShane who works in human resources, who seems awfully flirty with Hex for some reason, and begins to ask a lot of strange questions. After having a mental breakdown after a surgery he is asked to do on one of his very close friends, who seems to have fallen over a motorcycle or some sort of accident whilst out riding his motorcycle, X decides to leave the operating room. In doing so, he comes across Miss McShane again, and he also comes across one of his fellow surgeons, who seems intent on taking him out for the night to forget all of his problems, especially down the White Rabbit, where his mate has already set him up a date. But instead, on the way, he meets up with Miss McShane. Suddenly, Hex realizes whilst outside the pub that something isn't quite right, and on his way home he suddenly gets attacked by a bunch of mad people who seem intent on taking him down, believing he's seen too much. Shane follows along with him in hopes to make sure he gets home safe. But in doing so, she unintentionally takes him to the TARDIS, in which the Doctor is waiting. Standing at the console of the great Colossus machine, the Doctor is standing there and turns around to find young Hex perplexed. Oh my God! As he looks around the room and its giant magnificence. The Doctor and Miss McShane pretend to be, they pretend to be spies infiltrating his workplace to try and stop extraterrestrial materials being used for bad purposes. Upon sending Mr. Hex and Miss McShane back into the building, later down the line revealed to be Ace, the pair of them infiltrate the building in search of this extraterrestrial material, only to discover that behind all the madness is none other than the Cybermen. Yes, the Cybermen have arrived on Earth, but not in their usual form. This batch of Cybermen have infiltrated Earth and its overhoarding spare parts in order to turn themselves into human beings. The Doctor, confused by this and absolutely paralyzed with decision, begins to question the Cyberman's motives. The Cyberman tries to encourage the Doctor into believing that their intentions are purely and solely to reimagine themselves once again as flesh rather than steel and metal. The Doctor almost falls for this until one of the Cyber Leader starts attacking the guy who they've been working with, and the Doctor points out that he knew all along in his heart the Cybermen could never truly become a force for good. Meanwhile, Ace and Hex try not to get put in the grinder as they get put on the list for spare parts and organs. One of the doctors, who has been experimenting on the patients, uses the tool that he was going to use to cut them open, to cut through the Cyberman and turn him into nothing more than blood and parts. It managed to shut down the Cybermen once and for all, and Hex decides to travel with the Doctor and Ace. Along the way, Hex often asks Ace questions about whether or not this is a normal day. Ace brings up the fact of sink plungers, a little nod to the Daleks. So, what did I think of The Harvest? Well, I liked it quite honestly because it's not a normal and typical sort of Cyberman story. In most Cyberman stories, we get the very robotic side of the Cybermen. It's interesting to have a story where the Cybermen have still infiltrated Earth, are still trying to take over the world and take over the universe, but for once they're using flesh and they're trying to manipulate it in order to make themselves appear human, even though all that logic thinking is still going on inside their brains. The idea that the Cybermen came to Earth and not only went to hospital for spare parts, they're using the spare parts to build their bodies. It's an insane amount of brilliance. And I love the irony of the people in charge in this hospital have been telling themselves they're doing the right thing, talking about this idea that it's easy to turn people into Cybermen, but turn Cybermen into people is much harder. And this idea that this is just another classic example, as the Doctor points out in his angry frustrations. This is not the first time the Cybermen have done this. Telos, um, Mondas, Planet 15, all of these places, even as we get further into the future, this idea of even in Lumix world, they're still doing this. Ascension of the Cybermen, they're still doing this. And the fact that in this story it shows what lengths the Cybermen will go to for galactic conquest, to me is a marvel because especially after listening to audio such as the Orion War, I think this concept in The Harvest would have worked really well, especially with this idea that you have cyborgs in the Orion War who act like humans and believe themselves to be a sentient being, and yet right here you have the Cybermen doing the sort of same, but in more of in a power play move. They're doing it because they know it will help them infiltrate things. And for that reason, I purely give The Harvest a solid 9 out of 10. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next Doctor Who review. Until then, goodbye, you beautiful people.